The sun had long since set beyond the horizon, leaving only a dim twilight glow in the western sky. In the darkening forest surrounding the small town of Glukov, a sense of unease was slowly building. The forest had always been considered a dangerous place, where the local residents rarely ventured after sunset. But deep within this forest lay one of the town's darkest secrets, a long-abandoned and forgotten psychiatric hospital. The hospital was built in the late 19th century, when revolutions were raging across the country, and mental illness was seen more as a curse than a disease. In those days, hospitals were rarely closed, even if something strange or unexplainable happened there. But this one seemed to have vanished from people's memories. Only the oldest residents could recall its existence and tell of the day when something inexplicable occurred within its walls, leading to the hospital's permanent closure. The story begins with Victor, a young journalist searching for material for his latest report. Victor had recently been assigned by a major magazine to write an article about the country's forgotten and abandoned places. The idea came to him after he stumbled upon an old map found in the town museum's archives. The map marked a place no one knew about, labeled simply as hospital. Curiosity and professional zeal would not allow Victor to ignore this discovery. He understood that this could become a sensation, and he was willing to risk everything for a good story. After asking a few questions around town, he heard about the dark rumors surrounding the forest and the old hospital. Some spoke of the spirits of dead patients wandering the woods, while others claimed to have seen strange shadows among the trees. But Victor, a man accustomed to mysteries and the paranormal, considered these stories mere superstitions. Armed with the map, a flashlight, and a camera, he set off in his old Volga, following the map's directions. With each kilometer, the forest grew denser, and the road became less and less visible. Soon, he had to leave his car behind and continue on foot along an old path leading to his destination. The path was narrow, covered in fallen leaves, and only the rustling of the wind and the occasional bird song broke the silence. Victor walked on, carefully observing his surroundings, but he noticed nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until several hours later, when the sky had turned completely dark, that he saw ahead of him an old, crumbling structure. The hospital that had been the subject of so many stories stood deep within the forest, as though forgotten by time and humanity. As he approached, Victor noticed that the building was indeed in a state of disrepair. The windows were broken, the walls covered in moss and mold, and the doors hung askew. But the strangest thing was the feeling that washed over him as he gazed at the place. For the first time in his professional career as a journalist, he felt not just fear but an inexplicable sense of dread, as though someone or something was watching him. Inside, the hospital was even more eerie. The stairs creaked underfoot, the air was thick with the scent of damp and decay. Old beds lay scattered in the corridors, some overturned, others covered in a thick layer of dust. Medical instruments lay in corners, and here and there were remnants of documents long decayed with time. But the strangest experience occurred when Victor decided to explore the basement, about which all the local legends spoke. He found a hatch leading downward and, clutching his flashlight, began to descend a narrow staircase. The walls of the basement were covered in mold, and the floor was slick with moisture. But ahead, deep in the basement, Victor saw something he hadn't expected. The basement turned out to be a vast labyrinth of corridors and cells, most of which were locked. Some of the doors bore scratches from fingernails and bloodstains. Victor heard a faint rustling behind one of the doors and, deciding to investigate, opened it. Inside, he found an old metal table with chains and straps, likely used to restrain patients. But the most terrifying sight was a figure lying in the corner, covered by a dirty, tattered blanket. He approached and pulled off the blanket, and his blood ran cold. It was a creature that had once been human, but now its body was so disfigured it was almost unrecognizable. The face was contorted in a grimace of horror, the hands twisted, and the eyes seemed to stare directly at him. Victor recoiled in shock, his heart racing. He fled the cell, but as he looked back, the door slowly closed behind him, as if someone or something didn't want him to leave. With each step through the basement, he felt the presence of something malevolent growing stronger. His mind began to falter. He heard voices, whispers, saw shadows flickering at the corners of his vision. Suddenly, it seemed as though the walls were closing in, and the corridors were lengthening, as if the very walls were trying to trap him there. Victor found a door leading to a laboratory and opened it. Inside was a large room filled with tables covered in beakers, test tubes, and flasks with unknown substances. In the center of the room stood a large metal cabinet, and Victor, overcoming his fear, approached and opened it. Inside, he found books filled with tiny handwriting, old reports, and records. As he read through them, he realized that the hospital had been more than just a medical facility. It was a place where horrifying experiments on humans were conducted, aimed at exploring the limits of the human mind and body. These experiments were so brutal that the patients either died in agonizing pain or turned into the very monsters Victor had discovered in the basement. The most terrifying realization was that the experiments had never truly ended. The surviving patients had become part of the hospital, its blood and flesh. They couldn't leave, their minds were forever tied to this place, and now they were part of its nightmare. Victor understood that the only way to escape was to burn everything to the ground. He found a gasoline can, poured its contents throughout the basement, and then struck a match. The fire quickly spread, consuming everything in its path. Victor ran for the exit, pursued by the horrifying screams of the creatures trying to escape the flames. He made it outside, but as he looked back, he saw that the hospital was burning not only on the outside but also within him. He realized that he would never return to a normal life, that the nightmares of this hospital would haunt him forever. He was the last person to leave that hospital, but the price was too high. A darkness had settled in his soul, one that would never fade.